In this video, I'm going to address 7 objections raised by atheists to the account to the story of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'll try to keep it pithy and short, so let's get started. The first one would be, why would Joseph and Mary go to Bethlehem for the census? The objection is that Romans are brutally efficient, and asking everyone to go to their hometowns just for the sake of census would be a ridiculously slow process, and it's so inefficient, and Romans would never do that. Well, when I first heard the objection, I thought the same too. I thought, oh, that's a reasonable argument. But turns out Romans were not as brutally efficient as we want them to be. And in fact, they were brutally inefficient many times. For example, one extra-biblical example of this is C. Vibius Maximus, one of the Roman prefects. He ordered all the people in his jurisdiction or in his area in around 104 AD to travel back to their hometowns precisely for the sake of census. Now, that is a slow and wasting process, but that's what he ordered. So there we go. The second objection is, why would Pilate not want to kill Jesus when he's against Jews anyways? Simply because someone doesn't like a people group doesn't mean they would all act tyrannically like Hitler did. Pilate was a Roman governor, and he did follow the Roman law. Whenever an objection was brought against someone saying he's an insurrectionist, they had a process of bringing that person before the governor and having a trial. Pilate did that, and he found that the accusations being brought against Christ are not factual and not true. He did find no evidence to say that Christ was starting an insurrection, and therefore he wanted to let Jesus Christ go and not crucify him. However, because he cared about peace and stability, he did ultimately give up Jesus Christ to be crucified because he didn't want riots to start. Third objection. Why would the Romans release Barabbas, or why would Pilate release Barabbas? Again, they say Romans are very strict when it came to insurrections or anyone trying to usurp the Roman power. Barabbas was a former insurrectionist who was arrested and put in prison. Why would Pilate release such a person? That has to do with the Jewish customs at that time. Although the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, was under the Roman control, they still enjoyed some privileges and freedoms up until AD 60 or 70, when they rebelled against Romans and the Jewish temple was completely destroyed and the nation of Israel was completely destroyed. Now, one of the customs they had was that the Jewish people and the Jewish religious elite would get to ask the governor for a prisoner of their choice to be released during the Passover festival. And that's what they did. And they requested for Barabbas. And because Pilate had to grant whoever prisoner that they would request, he did grant them. Now, yes, he was an insurrectionist. And if he starts another insurrection, Romans could curb it right away in its initial stages. He did release Barabbas because he was following the custom. The fourth objection, why would the soldier pierce the side of Jesus when the aim of Romans is to let the criminals live as long as they can on the cross? That is true. Romans were brutal in the way they administered punishments, and they used to leave people hanging on the crosses, either by tying them to the cross or by nailing them to the cross. And the aim is to let them live on the cross as long as they can, bearing that pain and slowly dying. So why would they pierce the side of Jesus' body? Why wouldn't they let him hang on and suffer? Well, again, this has to do with the customs of Jewish peoples at that time. As I said, the Romans did respect the Jewish customs and gave some privileges. One of the customs is that Jews believe that it is somehow a defilement if dead bodies or if criminals hang on the cross on the day of Sabbath. So because they didn't want anyone to hang on the cross on Sabbath, they wanted to quicken the process of death for criminals, and they used to break the legs of criminals so that the pain would intensify and the person dies before Sabbath begins and they can remove the body from the cross. That was the standard process. Now, even in that case, why wasn't Jesus' legs broken? Why did the soldier decide to pierce the side of Jesus? Perhaps because the soldier could see that Jesus was already dead, that he's not breathing anymore. So he knew Jesus died anyways. But in a mocking way, he's like, well, let me double confirm. Let me put a spear through his side. Perhaps that's the reason. Perhaps there was some other reason, but ultimately, I would say it's God's providential act, in order to fulfill the scriptures that none of the bones of Christ would be broken. But in either case, it is not an unbelievable thing that the soldier would put a spear through the side of Jesus, because they did quicken the process. Even if the soldier did not believe that Christ died, perhaps he did that to quicken the process of death. Or maybe he already believed that Christ died and he just wanted to double confirm. In either case, it's not unbelievable, because they did do things to quicken the process of death for criminals in the area of Israel to honor their customs. The fifth objection, is it fifth? No. Yes, that's right. Why would the Romans make an exemption for one person? Why let Jesus' body be buried in a tomb instead of leaving it on the cross? Again, like I just said, it was the Jewish custom to take down the bodies before Sabbath, so they would take down the bodies anyway. And apart from that, an even more important reason is that a person called Joseph of Arimathea, an influential person, went and requested Pilate for a special permission to bury the body of Jesus. Now think of it, an influential person going to the governor and asking for the body of another influential person, not too surprising that he would get special permissions. Moreover, we see from the account of crucifixion that Pilate regarded Christ as someone special. He saw that Christ is different from every other person he has seen. He realized that Christ was not a criminal, that the accusations being brought against him are not factual. That's why he tried to save him. And then he also believed that Christ could be some spiritual or supernatural person with some supernatural abilities because of the information his wife passed him, because of what he has heard from the people and from the mouth of Jesus Christ himself. So it is not surprising that Pilate would give special permissions to bury the body of Jesus in a tomb. Now, also, think of it. If Jesus' body was not buried, by the way, why would the story that Jesus' disciples came and stole the body of Jesus from the tomb would even begin and circulate? Just for you to think, or for those to object to the accounts of resurrection. Now, the next objection is that the Gospels were not written until 40 years after the events took place. How can we believe them? Now, that might sound like a long gap between the time when the actual events happened and when they were recorded. But when we talk about the books of antiquity, that is a very, very small time gap. It's unbelievably small. No other book of antiquity even comes close. Now, that said, there are more reasons why we can trust the gospel accounts, although they were written 40 years after the actual events happened, because 40 years is such a short span. It would be within the lifetime of eyewitnesses, and therefore it is impossible for legendary tendencies to build up and remove or eliminate the hard historical fact. Also, the next objection says, the letters of Paul, written some 20 years prior to the Gospels, do not mention anything about the empty grave, empty tomb. So isn't this an embellishment in the Gospels? Now, for this objection, I don't know where to begin. Let's read what the Apostle Paul wrote 20 years before the Gospels. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 to 6, he says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, and then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep." Don't you see a problem with this objection? Saying, oh, Paul did not mention anything about the empty grave, therefore that's an embellishment in the Gospels. Really? Paul clearly says here that Christ died according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day. Now, tell me, if a person was buried, and then he comes back to life, and then appears to people, what would become of the tomb that he was buried in? Would it be empty, Or would it be occupied? How is this even an objection? Um, Again, like I always say in my videos, ask yourself, be honest with yourself. Are you rejecting the account of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection because the evidence is not clear? Or is it because you've already made up your mind not to believe?